The most misunderstood character in One Piece is Rolling Logan, because physically I cannot understand how that neck functions. It's thick with so many C's. But a close second place is Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. I get that he's done a lot of bad things. Murder, for example, mass murder for another example, and if we need a third, then genocide. He did that one time too. But Sakazuki is not to be conflated with other series villains. Sakazuki isn't someone who does evil for the sake of selfish ambitions like some sort of large rotund mother, nor is he someone who sees no value in human life like a certain flamboyant flamingo. In fact, that's the most twisted thing about Sakazuki. The fact that from his perspective, he is the hero of this story. A hero doing only what is necessary to ensure the safety of the world. And a lot of this nature can be perfectly understood by his extremely tragic past, which we know a lot more about than you may remember. So look, I don't want to sound like some sort of Sakazuki apologist, but very few people understand Sakazuki. Even right at the beginning, at the very basic concept of absolute justice. Absolute justice is the belief that the ends will always justify the means. No sacrifice is too great for the greater good, blah blah blah, justice, blah blah blah. We all know how it goes. The thing is, we often associate this as Sakazuki's personal brand of justice, but it is not. And a good way to think of absolute justice is like a religion. Say you've got your root Christianity, and then under that you've got all of your different denominations of Christianity. That, but for justice. Sakazuki himself is a practitioner of teteteki nasegi, which means thorough justice. And that means that Sakazuki is something of a justice perfectionist. And if we think of him as a lovely maid, Sakazuki is the kind of person who would eradicate every last molecule of dust from my lounge room before even daring to declare it clean. However, doing that would be rather impractical. Very time and resource consuming, like you gotta source the maid outfit and everything. So the shortcut to a thorough cleaning would be to blow up the house, thus eradicating all of the dusts and completing this task at any cost, which is more or less exactly what Sakazuki did with Ohara. To prevent the possibility of even one scholar molecule escaping the island, he just killed everyone just to make sure. An entire population eradicated in seconds. But hey, at least now there's no scholars to spawn more assorted evil into the world. Whereas a vice admiral with a less thorough sense of justice may have imposed a quarantine or something to examine and cleanse the population of any evil scholars before releasing them back into the world. But that is again very resource and time intensive. But make no mistake, it's not all about efficiency, it's also very much about risk assessment, because letting the population live presents a chance that a scholar will escape. And no matter how small that chance is, to Sakazuki, it's not worth taking. Which isn't to say that Sakazuki doesn't value the lives of those he ends up taking. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Sakazuki understands the core value of life, and that's why he goes so far in his pursuits. To quote the Magma Man himself, "If you're gonna do it, finish the job. If by chance even a single scholar is hiding out in that ship, all of this sacrifice will be for naught. You must destroy evil at its very roots." Essentially, if we don't take this chance to eradicate evil, then all of the sacrifices made to get there will be meaningless. So the end only justifies the means if we are extremely thorough. Otherwise, it's pointless. Sakazuki is not the cold-blooded killer that many fans and even in-world characters often portray him as. For example, when Caesar Clown was working at Punk Hazard, he stated that Sakazuki would love some of his funky clown weapons, and I think that's actually slandering Sakazuki, because it gives us, as readers, the impression that his beliefs are more in line with Caesar, but they're not. Caesar created those weapons specifically with extreme collateral damage because he sees no value in life that isn't his. And to be fair, Sakazuki may indeed want them weapons, but he would put them to use in a much more calculated and heavy-hearted way. Only if they were the most necessary and, of course, the most thorough option. Because funnily enough, Sakazuki is surprisingly conservative. I say surprisingly because the first thing we heard about him post-time skip was moving Marineford into the New World to take a much more violent, active approach to justice. But despite that, he is extremely selective about when to engage in operations, to the point where it's practically pacified his reign as a fleet admiral. Because he is arguably more mindful of human life and general resources than any fleet admiral before him. And if the operation isn't guaranteed to eradicate evil, then the sacrifice, any sacrifice, isn't justifiable, which actually makes him a very capable leader. He's not willing to pull a Kaido and YOLO himself into battle combat without thinking, or I guess more accurately, without caring about the potential losses. And as a result, Sakazuki himself will not kill without a very good reason. Although the problem is, what he considers to be a very good reason is very, very different from what people like you and I might consider a good reason. And this is where the bloodthirsty magma mad lad impression comes from. Specifically that one time where he killed a Marine retreating from the Paramount War. One may, and in fact I will say that this was unnecessary, cruel, and what was he even doing there? I mean, don't you have 100,000 Marines to be commanding somewhere over there? But this is another example of thorough justice in action. As the representatives of justice, the Marines must be 100% dedicated to the cause. Any doubt is seen as a weakness and a potential growth spot for evil. Like a slightly damp patch on your otherwise clean and schmick justice pants, ready to open the doors to the growth of evil mold. Sakazuki also said, if you care about your family, then die an honorable death, which is another thing. Sakazuki is very strongly tied to the concept of honor despite engaging in distinctly dishonorable activities. However, this is mostly in regards to pirates and other assorted criminals. For example, the whole squad situation where Sakazuki said, "Hey pirate man, Whitebeard told me that he's going to betray you because you look funny and smell bad." To which Squad replied, "My dad said, what? I'm going to believe you, a high-ranking enemy official with a clear agenda, and I'ma put a sword through my dad's chest right now." So a bit of an overreaction there. But realistically, there was probably more to it than that. Sakazuki probably fabricated some sort of actual evidence to convince Squad as opposed to just blindly believing Admiral-level gossip. When it comes to pirates and general criminals though, Sakazuki has no respect for their life whatsoever, because they are the disease that is destroying the justice. And not only that, but the disease is genetic, which we saw when Sakazuki accused both Luffy and Ace of being, quote, criminals by blood. Really, he could have seen them as criminals because of all of their criminal activities, but to Sakazuki, those activities were an obvious outcome because of the particular genetic material that fertilized their mother's eggs, which I guess we'll call evil sperm. Luffy and Ace are not the root of the problem to Sakazuki. Destroying the problem at its roots would be going back to Roger and Dragon, or I guess now just Dragon because Roger has been destroyed. It is interesting to note that on at least one occasion, Sakazuki has failed to implement his famed thorough justice, which is when he fought Kuzan on Punk Hazard. The two of them agreed to fight to the death, and upon achieving glorious magma-based victory, Sakazuki got very emotional, and he could not bring himself to kill his former justice comrade. And this rare act of mercy only reinforced the necessity of thorough justice, because Kuzan then said Lamau XD and joined the Blackbeard pirates, adding an entire admiral to the already insane power force of an emperor, threatening to completely destabilize the world. If I was Sakazuki, this would haunt me. That one time that I showed a sliver of mercy now threatens to grow into the ultimate evil. This is why we need to be thorough, everyone. But of course, Sakazuki isn't this way without reason. A person is not born with such dogmatic beliefs. They are forged. And with that in mind, we likely know a lot about Sakazuki's past that has yet to be told. Here's a checklist of bad things that we can infer. 1. Justice has failed Sakazuki before. 2. It failed because whoever was administering said justice probably wasn't thorough or showed some sort of mercy in some way. 3. At some point, a Marine, or even Marines plural, abandoned their duty or refused to carry out their duty, resulting in tragic outcomes. And 4. Sakazuki has a strong connection to pirates and or criminals, perhaps growing up amongst them and declaring them irredeemable to the point where it's a genetic trait. In addition to that, we have one childhood image of Sakazuki, indicating that he came from quite the unfortunate circumstances, gripping onto that knife as if it was the only difference between life and death. Also, as a 5-year-old, Sakazuki has a six-pack, which is, that's pretty wow. And in case you're wondering what his hat says, those are the kanji for Seigi, meaning justice. So we're gonna pop all of the above into the flashback simulation machine and see what comes out. So behold, the tragic past of Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. Sakazuki was born in baby form on a pirate-ruled island. For now, we'll say it's Hachinosu because that's the only one we know of. He was born to parents Mamazuki and Papazuki. They were just regular citizens doing regular things, like, say, selling cabbages. Yes, they were cabbage merchants. That's what they were. However, life on this island was brutal because it was a lawless territory where only the strongest and six-packiest of 5-year-olds survive. In fact, you know what? This island is so lawless that Sakazuki has never even heard the word justice before. It doesn't exist in the lexicon of this civilization. And one day a fight breaks out at the family cabbage stand. Hungry pirates, not wishing to pay 150 berries, which is the canonical market price for a single cabbage, instead steal all of the cabbages and murder Papazuki in the process. And also, Mamazuki is captured. Meanwhile, a young Sakazuki manages to escape the island and is found by a squad of Marines led by a man named Captain Justiceman, led by a man named Captain Justiceman, that's his name. And so Sakazuki explains the situation and the Marines agree to deliver justice to the pirates. A word which Sakazuki doesn't understand. What is this just ice of which you speak, he says, going on to be enlightened that there is a force in this world capable of ending all of the suffering. The Marines set sail and invade Hachinosu. And you know what, due to Sakazuki being in his mid-50s in the modern day, this is going to be in the pre-Rocks era. So Hachinosu may not be a massively prominent island. Facing overwhelming odds, meaning lots and lots of pirates, many of the Marines involuntarily soil themselves from fear and swiftly retreat, leaving only Marine Captain Justiceman remaining. A man so determined that against all odds, he succeeds in defeating all of the pirates and freeing Mamazuki. However, tragic flashbacks rarely have happy endings, because if they did, then I guess we'd call them happy flashbacks. But in this case, a single lone pirate only pretended to be defeated, and when our captain's guard was down, this pirate fatally wounded Captain Justiceman and also killed Mamazuki just because. In his dying moments, Marine Captain Justiceman takes a hat from the floor, writes the kanji for justice onto it, and plonks it on the head of Sakazuki, saying something along the lines of, "Now you are the justice man," before promptly dying. Sakazuki then takes a trusty knife from the battlefield and finishes each and every pirate, thoroughly dismantling the very concept of life so that they will never again be capable of generating evil. Because what was the lesson from all of this? What did Sakazuki blame for justice failing this day? The retreating Marines, Captain Justiceman's oversight, or even the actions of the pirates themselves? The answer is all of the above. And from this moment onwards, Sakazuki's path is clear. Join the Marines, gain power, and enact very, very thorough justice. And this past now brings us into the inevitable future. Sakazuki isn't going to stay behind a desk forever. In fact, throughout the post-time skip era, there has been a growing rift between the Marines and the world government. Sakazuki is very frustrated with those 5 old men. Oh, and fun fact, when he yelled at them, this was actually a retrospective hint at Imu. Sakazuki said, "So you're telling me that the whole mistaken mess about Doflamingo leaving the warlords was on orders from even higher than you all?" And one of the elders even went on to call Sakazuki's honor a trifling matter, which was very rude. And I think it's quite clear that Sakazuki and the world government are ultimately incompatible. And for someone who believes so devoutly in his chosen form of justice, I can't see Sakazuki remaining under their command. Because right now, he has the largest military force in the world, the greatest degree of resources, and theoretically sole authority to command and use both, and yet he is still completely powerless. This isn't thorough at all. In fact, this isn't justice at all. So I do think a time will come when Sakazuki decides to take this world into his own hands. Not for the sake of world domination, not for the sake of power, in fact, not for the sake of any personal gain whatsoever, but for the sake of peace, stability, and prosperity. But for such an outcome to be achieved, it is going to take a horrific sacrifice on a scale that we have never seen before.